Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, PBM, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Marks Paneth, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Amerant Bank, Bank of America, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, People's United Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, and these friends. Oh boy, I always have my crystal apple to ask me what's going on. Is it bright, shiny? I, the majority of people are telling me it's very shiny in the future, maybe a year or maybe 2 years on the office market. But really, what is it like today? So the question is, what's the office market in 2021? I've assembled this group of business leaders to provide their insight on the market. My guests include Eric Garau, co-CEO of GFP Real Estate, Bill Elder, Executive Vice President, Managing Director of the New York City Leasing for RXR Realty, Jeremy Moss, Executive Vice President of Silverstein Properties. Last but not least, the man from the other side, the tenant representative, Steve Berliner, Vice Chairman for Savills North America. So, Steve, normally I wouldn't have the broker talk. So I want you, since you're representing tenants, to tell us what's really happening today in the market for the tenants.
Sure, Mike. Thanks for having me today. In a word, I think the market today is uncertain. There's uncertainty all around us regarding vaccines. When can people go back to work? When do schools reopen for the kids? Restaurants, museums? When is it safe? And so when you couple that with the work from home environment, a lot of tenants are really rethinking how they want to operate their businesses. And that's been indicative by a lot of 1 and 2 year deals that the other panelists have done to keep tenants happy in the buildings and give them a chance to reassess their needs. So right now the market is very soft. We know that leasing is dramatically down. We have vacancy rate north of 15% in Manhattan, first time in decades. Concession packages are very high. Face rents are coming down. And landlords, like our fellow panelists who aren't highly levered, are going to make deals because there'll always be a flight to quality in a recession like we've had in past recessions. And that's quality of space, quality of building, and quality of landlord.
You read the press, you read all this information. What percentage of people are really coming back, or going to their office in your buildings? Eric?
Yeah, we're about 15% so far, up from what was probably about half that, say 9 months ago or something like that. So we're slowly trending forward, which we think is good. Fridays have been light, definitely the lightest day that we've had so far. But so far it's been holding steady at around 15% for the last probably 90 to 120 days.
Bill?
We do have a couple buildings that are in the 35-ish% in the city. But what's interesting is in our suburban locations, those are actually 50%, a little bit higher on a pretty routine basis. So We think transportation has a little bit to do with that, or everybody drives in those locations. So interesting to see the mix between the two product types.
Jeremy?
We're bouncing between 10 and 15%, pretty similar to the citywide statistics that we're seeing.
Do you think people are going to stay work at home, or are they going to change their environment and work, let's say, 1 or 2 days from home and come into the office 3 or 4?
I think it's still a little too early to tell. I think that it's going to take 12 or so months to kind of sort through a lot of this. Personally, I just don't see a lot of utility in working from home several days a week. I think there's some population travels a lot, back office that could, but you really miss the fabric of the company, the mentoring opportunities. How do you onboard somebody? And look, for me personally, many of us work from home on Fridays. We set it up that way from kind of when we came back in June to the office. I just note a different tenor of people's pace and not work ethic, but just I think the focus. So I think when companies really start to analyze, nobody's really measured productivity. I think that there's studies out there that suggest that they have, but I think work from home will have definitely utilities. There'll be changes, but I'm just not buying several days a week.
Jeremy?
I think it's going to change on the margin, similar to what Bill is saying. Will people take a Friday off here and there because they learned that they can use technology to do that, spend a little more time with their families, get a jump start on a vacation? Absolutely. Are there certain functions that, are better done from the solitude of your home? Sure. But I think that's just going to lead to a marginal change in how people use space. And I think a lot of those conversations had started before the pandemic. I think what the pandemic did is it just accelerated a lot of those discussions. The consequence is that the space that people do use will be far more valuable because they'll be doing those things that they must do collaboratively in their space. So I think that's going to drive a flight to quality, to the buildings that can really accommodate a more flexible and collaborative work environment.
What adjustments have you and your buildings adjusted with regard to COVID, with regard to cleaning, with regard to air filtration? What have you done to adapt your properties to that? Eric?
Yeah, so we've done a bunch of air filtration stuff around the HVAC systems. And initially we planned on doing a lot of cleaning changes, but what's happened is as people haven't really come back, it hasn't been as necessary as we thought. So we basically track the people coming in, the areas of the building they are using, and we do extra cleaning into all of those areas. But otherwise, without a large population coming back in, we haven't had to make that many changes.
Before the WeWorks of the world, Knotel just filed bankruptcy. Do we see the co-working continuing? And Bill, you guys got involved with a little co-working over there, and Jeremy, you had the Silver Suites over there. Where do you see the co-working in the future?
I don't think it's going away at all. I think, Jeremy said before, I think it's going to be part of the fabric of the building offering and in a flex environment, right? I think co-working probably going to struggle and, maybe not come back at all, but or very little of the population. But I think flex for companies is definitely going to be an important part of the mix going forward. So, I think either you're going to have it in kind of a cluster of buildings or in a building to, kind of meet that new tenant demand. I think that'll be one of the changes we see from, this pandemic.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I once again, Bill and I are on the same page. It was becoming an important part of the ecosystem of a building, and it's that much more important today. People are realizing that being nimble and being flexible are an important part of space planning, an important part of what a building should offer. So we're all looking at different ways of accommodating that, and that relates to the show that we did. I think it was last year, where we talked about the importance of integrating flex space into any quality office building to accommodate growth, short-term needs, flexible term, a whole range of needs that can come up.
Hoteling.
People are doing it within their space. There's no question. we're going to see, I think we were starting to see more of a hybrid model to begin with pre-pandemic. And I think it's going to continue. So that'll influence how people lay space out to some degree. And I think when we talk about, uncertainty, I don't think people are uncertain about the future of the economy or the future of office buildings. I think there are just some questions that people are grappling with about exactly how they want to lay out their space. So before they spend those dollars, people are saying, hey, let's take, 6, 12 months and let's give it a little bit of thought and make sure we do it right.
What about when you hear that Salesforce wants to change their operation on their space needs and other companies over there? How are you going to get new tenants to take the space? Because right now you have significant vacancy and a lot of sublease. What are you going to do to change this world? What do you think you need to do?
I think this whole thing has demonstrated a few things. Tenants care about who their landlord is and what the landlord's doing to keep them safe and be progressive and create systems and applications to, make for easy entry into buildings and order extra cleaning and, whole menu of services. They also care about the infrastructure of the building as far as what you offer, air filtration systems, wellness, all the different categories inside of the building. So I think modern, Class A new buildings were significantly redeveloped will outperform. I think once again, acceleration of, obsolete assets is probably going to pick up a greater pace. The world was shifting this way to begin with, just the amenity package and all the different offerings that the tenant's trying to, kind of outsource to the landlord. So I think the big question is what's in that package of services on the amenity side, which we're, all still kind of sorting through. But I think definitely, telehealth, telemedicine, some type of on-site healthcare is going to be a key component of the wellness package going forward.
Who's looking today for space? What type of tenants are we talking about? Are we talking about Fortune 500? Or are we talking about the smaller tenants? Who's leasing?
I just want to give my opinion on work from home, and this is from managing brokerage businesses for 25 years. I think there's a lost generation of young professionals in all industries right now who are losing, and Bill mentioned this briefly, the importance of education and mentoring from senior professionals like people on this panel. I mean, Eric, I believe, started working an elevator in one of the family buildings and worked his way up to CEO of a company. And when you're blessed with that type of mentorship and leadership, it's why he is where he is today. So I think that for various industries like law firms, you have young associates who generally would get very close to a senior partner, and that senior partner would help them maneuver through the partnership track. So I think young people are really getting the short shrift, forgetting college and obviously that whole issue. That's number one. Number two, with co-working, I think it's very important for landlords to offer various amenities to their tenants to differentiate themselves from others. And certainly one of them is co-working, because it allows tenants to have the flexibility to shrink or to grow, because optionality in leases is going to be very important going forward. I'm sure that all the landlords here are seeing that and will continue to see it. So these are all really important. And my question, again, and I'm happy to ask one question of the panel relating to this, is Newmark is buying Knotel. Cushman has a relationship with Industrious, yet they just sold 35 going to 40% of their firm to CB. And I certainly understand the benefit to the brokerage firms of owning that in terms of tenant control and information. But I frankly find it a little hard to understand what the client is getting out of it. And it certainly, in my view, puts them in competition with landlords who are much better at operating real estate than brokers are. And it raises the question, is a Newmark broker going to bring a tenant to Industrious, which is owned by CB, and are CB brokers going to bring tenants to Knotel, who's owned by Newmark? So who's in the market today? Typically 10 to 15% of all leases expire every year. So there are always going to be leases that are coming due. I have a couple of leases out right now. One is a new deal, a new tenant to the city. The other is an early renewal. We represent several tenants whose leases are several years prior to expiration, who are redoing their deals right now because it's a win-win. The tenant gets the benefit of a softer market, and the landlord gets a financeable long-term lease with a good tenant. So again, this panel is very indicative. You have three great owners who are long-term holders. They're not flippers. They're in the real estate business, and they're going to do what they have to do to strengthen their portfolios long-term. And I think there are great opportunities today to do that from the tenant side as well as the landlord side.
Eric, you own a number of B buildings where you have small tenants who have been really hit hard by the pandemic. What's happening today? Are they closing? Are they asking for reductions? What's happening in that marketplace?
Yeah, it depends on the industry. So obviously, we have a lot of theater people, so they're struggling. Obviously not open, so they're asking for reductions. The garments that are starting to come back a little bit, we're noticing that those tenants are sort of back at work. We have a little higher percentages of people getting together. Look at, they're a forward-looking business, right? So they're going to start making clothes for seasons in the future. So they have to get to work at that now. We've helped out all the restaurants. We haven't lost one retail tenant in our whole portfolio, which I think is good. But it's a struggle, look, last year when you had the PPP stuff, the rally was the government paid the rent for the first couple of months. So we assume the same thing's going to happen now. So we think, we'll get some relief into the hands of those small businesses. They'll be able to pay their employees, which is great. Give us a little bit of money so we can sort of hang on as we sort of move towards the summer. But Mike, I have a question for you about the co-working piece. So now every time I go get a loan, no matter what the current vacancy is in my building, the bank's always going to have sort of a vacancy credit, right? I could have a 100% lease building, but they're going to have this 5 or 7% where they're not going to give me credit because they just assume there's going to be some roll, there's going to be this or that. So if I'm not going to get credit in terms of my financing, why wouldn't I take 7% of my building and do co-working myself? And not necessarily co-working, just short-term, really flexible leases, the same things that Steve were talking about. If the bank's not going to give me credit, I'm not going to be hurt. And I think that's the way that you might see some other landlords compete in that area.
I think the big question is that many of the lenders are going to take a double. They're going to take the 7 and another 7 because you're operating that. That's how they look at it. I mean, in today's market, how many office buildings are being sold? It's not a time, okay? Today, you can't get financing on a C or a B building. It's like a falling knife, as many of the banks have said to me. I'm not making loans on small office buildings. I'm very worried about the market.
Sure, I know. I spent 6 years on the acquisition side, and it would be very difficult to do a pro forma of how much is my downtime, how much free rent am I giving on a 10 or a 15-year deal, what's my tenant improvement allowance, what are the escalations that I'm going to get. Obviously, one of the things we haven't talked about that I'm deeply concerned about in New York is the political environment. And there are a lot of mixed messages being sent out. There are a lot of local laws being passed very quietly that will have long-term effects on the real estate of New York, as these owners know better than anyone. Talking about raising taxes, you have many companies that are New York born and bred who are considering alternative marketplaces, lower tax environments where business is welcome. And again, work from home has shown that industries like legal, asset management, consulting can very effectively work from home while others can't. So, these are all things that I think business leaders and we all have to think about going forward because it's a very tricky time. And obviously the mayoral election, I think, has an added significance this year because we were blessed with great leadership post 9/11 from Giuliani and the Bloomberg administration. In the last 8 years, we paid a price. And I don't think we can survive another 8 years like we have now. So something I'm keeping a close look on.
There's a combination of the political environment and the perception, which is not a perception, of safety. As
Absolutely.
many owners that I know who've had properties near the Port Authority or near Penn Station have said the amount of homeless, the amount of people attacking people on the subway and all this, people are saying, hey, I don't need to come in for this. Why am I coming here? They're worried about this.
It's a big problem. It's got to be dealt with. It's getting to the point that it will drive business out of New York. Between the taxes and the crime, next mayor is going to have to really get a hold of the problem. It reminds me much like 1988, 89, as far as the homelessness and the lawlessness in the streets. Got to clean it up. It's probably the single biggest issue we have right now.
Right, and Mike, we're blessed with the best police department in the world. They've kept us safe from terrorism. It's been a much safer city the last, before de Blasio, many years. And it's a very important thing. We can't have an anti-police environment. We have to talk about retraining, that's fine, but to lessen the presence of the police force, now that things are happening, everyone's yelling for more police. So again, we can't have all these mixed messages and people are being elected for the wrong reasons. So we need an adult this time.
One area that people have spoken about is the office leasing in the boroughs. Okay, Eric, you have property over there. Bill, you have property in the boroughs. Okay, what do you see happening with the office leasing in the boroughs?
So it's definitely slower than the city, right? I don't think anybody expects right now that that's not the case, despite the disparity in price. We're seeing a little bit of activity, but it's not widespread. Like at some point, I think that may be the distributed workforce. That may be the solution as far as if you want cheaper space, you go to the boroughs, and, as opposed to going to North or South Carolina. We'll see how that plays out. Nobody's really committed to that at this point, but I think it'll get busier. And I don't know if it's going to be a snapback or what the recovery looks like. But I think we'll get to a point again where rents in New York are back where they were, and that will be a kind of a release valve for those kind of the lower priced alternative.
Eric?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, I was fully leased in both Brooklyn and Long Island City, so I was pretty happy with that. I've lost a few tenants in Brooklyn. Long Island City is doing okay for what we have so far, but I sort of expect that the tenants will come back. And for the same reasons they came to Brooklyn in the first place, I think it's only a pandemic that's slowing the leasing down. So in my opinion, I actually think the tenants I had before will come back once they're back in business.
One area that all three of you have been involved with, the owners, is life science. Okay, it's a big topic. It's something over there and everyone's getting involved. Do you see that growing by leaps and bounds, especially, with vaccines and other health conditions and so on?
Look, I would think so. I've been kind of staying close to this market for 2 or 3 years now. New York's got kind of the accelerators that make this, a popular location to have, bioscience and lab space and, the wide variety of life science real estate. It hasn't happened yet, though. I mean, the one thing that I keep, we want to do it, but I look at the pipeline of who's in the market, who's executing, it's still pretty weak. And I think that, Cambridge and West Coast still have the, upper hand right now, just as far as the accelerators that they have. But I think that, at some point the labor force, I think it'll shift to New York. So definitely hopeful. It's certainly alive here. There's activity, but not the kind of activity that by now was expected. But we're still staying very close to it.
Jeremy?
We got involved in a project in Philadelphia, and already I see a tremendous amount of demand there. I mean, Philadelphia very much resembles Cambridge from, some number of years ago. It's got all the right ingredients. It's got the academic institutions. It's got the, the medical institutions. It has the labor force. And as Bill said, New York has many of those ingredients. So I do think it's just a matter of time until we see more of that in the New York Metro and in the 5 boroughs. We certainly have buildings that would lend themselves beautifully to conversion with the necessary floor loading capacity and ceiling heights. So conversions are achievable and have been done successfully.
With regard to conversions, there was a discussion of going back to the Giuliani age with the 421Gs and coming out, converting the office buildings to residential. Do you see that happening in the next year or two?
I think on the margins, some of the obsolete office buildings may want to do that. It may be natural. Obviously, you have to get everybody out of the building, so that's always a trick. No matter what you want to do, whether you're going to turn it into a hotel or residential building or redevelop it. So I don't think it's just going to be a snap of a finger and then it happens. And where it does happen, it's going to take time. But I don't think it's going to be a major trend.
Over the years, the last 10 years, I'd say, many industrial properties were converted to office. I hear today that many of these are being reconverted back to industrial. What's your thoughts on that, Bill?
One of the bigger, shocks of my career, I guess, that some of our colleagues on the tenant brokerage side, some of Steve's colleagues in the kind of vice chairman world, we laugh about it because it's like, can you believe that I'm doing warehouse deals in the city of New York now? But it's a huge thing. We've actually we did a site out in Maspeth, Queens, and look, it's clearly one part of the mega trends, and so we're participating in it, and it's funny how these things the world changes for these different uses of real estate.
You have a lot of space that has become somewhat obsolete in today's world, and a lot of that is retail space because of the Amazon effect, obviously. But we've been talking probably for a couple of years already about what do we do with a lot of the vacant space. So, and that could be shopping malls, that can be large headquarter retail sites in the city, and education has been growing, and health has been growing, and life science has been growing. So, we've already started going through a repricing and a repurposing of space even pre-pandemic. And obviously the pandemic has accelerated a lot of these things because most of this demand is not coming back. We can hope and we can wish and we can pray, but I look at a lot of retail space and say, gee, be a nice corporate headquarters, main entrance right on the ground floor. How nice would that be? And, so I just think that landlords to survive, and full disclosure, I have a couple of tiny interests when I was on the landlord side. We all have to look at our portfolios and look to maximize things. And obviously having a well-located distribution center today has greater value than almost any other use because people will pay for it.
So in summation, unfortunately, the apple is not bright, and it's going to take a little while to get shiny, but hopefully it will get shiny with the vaccine and with the other changes over here and the new mayor and safety in the city of New York. And I'd like to thank Eric, Bill, Jeremy, and Steve, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Mike.